Hello, Bobs. We're back with Otávio. No, not Otávio. We're back with Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. This is, I believe, chapter 8, 9, 8. Otávio, which is a very long one, so it will be broken up into many sections. There are actual breaks in the text, so that helps. Otávio, body. De profundis. Joanna waited for the idea to become clearer, for that tenuous and luminous bubble, the germ of a thought to rise from the mists. De profundis. She felt it vacillate, almost lose its balance and sink forever into unknown waters, or at certain moments push back the clouds and tremulously grow, emerging almost completely. Then silence. She closed her eyes. Gradually, she began to rest. When she opened them again, she received a tiny shock. And I'm receiving a shock from this sunlight coming through the window onto the screen. And during the intense, prolonged moments that followed, she recognized that stretch of life as the combination of what she had lived and what remained to be lived, fused together and eternal. Strange, strange. The amber light on the stroke of 9, that impression of an interval, a distant piano being played with emphasis on the sharp notes, her heart beating furiously as it met the morning heat. And behind everything, the throbbing silence, ferocious and menacing, dense and impalpable. Everything began to fade. The piano interrupted its insistence on those final notes, and after a momentary pause gently resumed with some middle notes, producing a vivid, straightforward melody. And soon she wouldn't be able to tell whether her impression of the morning had been real or simply an idea. She lingered, attentively trying to place it. A sudden weariness confused her for a moment, her nerves forgotten, her face relaxed. She felt a gentle gust of tenderness for herself, almost of gratitude. Even though she couldn't explain why, for a second it struck her that she had lived and that her life was coming to an end. This light's got to come to an end too. There we go, much better in darkness. And immediately afterwards, that everything had been blank so far, like an empty space that she could hear, remote and muffled, the clamor of life approaching, dense, torrential, and violent. Its mighty waves rending the sky, coming closer and closer to submerge her, to throw her, suffocating her. She went up to the window, stretched her hands outside, and waited in vain for a little wind to come and caress them. And there she remained, oblivious of everything, for some considerable time. She blocked her ears by contracting the muscles of her face, her closed eyes barely allowing the light to penetrate, her head leaning forward. Little by little, she managed to isolate herself completely. This semi-conscious state, where she had the impression of plunging deeply into gray, lukewarm air. She stood in front of the mirror and muttered to herself, her eyes burning with hatred. And now what? She couldn't fail to notice her own face, small and flushed. This distracted her momentarily, helping her to forget her anger. Some little thing always occurred just in time to divert her from the main torrent. She was so vulnerable. Did she hate herself for this? No, she would hate herself more if she were capable, if she were already an immutable tree trunk until death, capable only of yielding fruits but not of growing within herself. She craved for even more, to be constantly reborn, to cut away everything she had learned, that she had seen, and to make a fresh start in some new terrain, where even the most trifling act might have some meaning, where she might breathe air as if for the very first time. She had the feeling that dense life was flowing slowly inside her, bubbling like a sheet of hot lava, perhaps if she were to fall in love. And if the thought seemed remote, the piercing blast of a trumpet might suddenly sever that mantle of night and leave the fields empty, green, and vast. And then excitable, white horses rebelliously craning and rearing, almost flying, might cross rivers, mountains, valleys. Thinking about them, she felt the air circulate inside her as if it were escaping from some hidden grotto, damp and fresh in the middle of the desert. But she soon returned to her senses in vertical descent. She examined her arms and legs. There she was. There she was. But she must first distract herself, she thought, with firmness and irony, with urgency, for might she not die? She laughed aloud and took a quick glance at herself in the mirror to observe the effect of that laughter on her face. No, it didn't make it brighter. She looked like a wild cat, her eyes burning above her red cheeks, covered in dark freckles, her brown hair disheveled over her eyebrows. She perceived in herself a somber and triumphant purple. What was she doing that she should glow like this? Wariness, yes. Despite everything, there was fire beneath her wariness. There was fire even when it represented death. Perhaps this was the taste of living. Once more she was overcome by sheer, inexplicable weariness. Perhaps I should go, perhaps. She closed her eyes for a moment, permitting herself the birth of a gesture or of a phrase without logic. I thought that was the entire book at this point. She always did this, confident that deep down beneath the lava there might be a desire already directed to some goal. Sometimes when she closed the doors of consciousness through a special mechanism not unlike that of lapsing into sleep and allowed herself to act or speak, she was surprised to receive, for she only perceived the gesture at the moment of its execution, a slap on her face from her own hand. Sometimes she heard strange gibberish coming from her lips. This whole book, even without understanding those words, they brought a sense of relief and greater freedom. And from the core of herself, after a moment of silence and abandon, there surged that first pale and hesitant, then increasingly compelling and painful. I summon you from the depths. I summon you from the depths. I summon you from the depths. She remained still for a few more minutes, her expression vacant, listless and weary, as if she had given birth to a child. Little by little she started to be reborn. She opened her eyes slowly and returned to the light of day. Fragile, breathing quietly, happy as a convalescent, enjoying that first moment of fresh air. Then she began to think that she had actually prayed. Not her. Something greater than her, and of which she was unaware, had prayed. But she had no desire to pray because she knew that prayer would be the remedy. But a remedy like morphine that numbs any kind of pain. Like the morphine one needs in ever-increasing doses in order to feel any effect. No, she was not so worn out that she should be cowardly enough to want to pray instead of discovering pain, of suffering, and possessing it entirely in order to experience all pain's mysteries. And even if she were to pray, she would end up in a convent because all the morphine in the world would not be enough to satisfy her craving, and this would be the final degradation, addiction. Yet unless she were to seek an external God by some natural cause, she would finish up deifying herself in order to explore her own sorrow. By loving her past, by seeking refuge and warmth in her own thoughts, born initially with the desire for work of art and later serving as a familiar nourishment during periods of sterility, she was in danger of establishing and regimenting herself inside suffering, which would also be an addiction, a form of sedation. What was to be done then? What was to be done to interrupt that path? To grant herself some respite between her and herself in order to be able to re-encounter herself without danger, renewed and pure. What was to be done? The piano was deliberately attacked with measured, uniform scales. Exercises, she thought. Exercises, yes. She discovered feeling amused. Why not? Why not try to fall in love? Why not try to live? Why not try to talk about Otávio? Anyway, I'm going to stop at this point because I'm 9.5 minutes in and this chapter goes on forever for some unknown reason. All right, Bobs, that's all for now. Good boy.